Welcome to Disasters and Donuts, where you can learn about unmanned systems for disasters and the time it takes to have donuts and a coffee. I'm Robin Murphy, and today in this podcast I want to talk about the best practices to reduce fatigue in small unmanned aerial system pilots. You know, fatigue's a real problem. We've always thought that, but we've just had a big study that came out and said, oh yeah, it's a problem, just like it is with manned aviation. So this was a study of 2019 going back over Harvey, Kilauea volcanic eruption, and Hurricane Michael, looking at 16 experienced pilots, doing the physiometric studies, the surveys, the things that all these top human factors and ergonomic scientists do. And it showed that all the pilots showed fatigue early in the deployment, even at Hurricane Michael, where we had regular shifts and in sleep cycles, and we never really recovered. And you know that. You get tireder and tireder as things go on, but a good night's sleep doesn't solve that. Okay? But what was worse is that at Hurricane Harvey, the level of fatigue impairment was above the legal limit for a manned aviation pilot. Well, that sounds kind of scary, but you know, they're UAVs. I mean, what damage can they do? Well, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I mean, first off, if we think about that, fatigue increases the possibility of human error, either that the data is lost or lower quality, it takes longer to collect. You know, the reason why you're flying the UAV is to give people information. You might accidentally violate regulations, have your return to home altitude set incorrectly, do something. You could have a collision, a crash, a hard landing. There's all sorts of things you can have go wrong. And the sources of fatigue have many causes. I mean, there's the lack of sleep and tiredness just from traveling to disaster. So if you're not a local team, if you got a disaster, by definition, you're having to bring resources for the outside. And the small unmanned aerial system team is probably showing up just as tired as everybody else. And if it's been a hurricane or something like that, you've got that 2 days of, oh, okay, I got to pack, what am I going to do? And that adds to it. Then if you do something like wearing personal protection equipment, like gas mask or protective clothing, like we had to do at the Kilauea volcanic eruption to protect from the SO2 gas, that puts a physiological stress. And then there's just the emotional and physiological stress of being at a disaster. Plus, we've got long days, or nights, or both, of working. Now, clearly there's more research that needs to be done on that, but you know, this is beginning to back up what many of us have been seeing since 2005 when the first flights began for disasters. So let's see what we can do about it now. So before the deployment, the biggest thing you can do that you can affect now is make sure your squads are actually really and truly trained and experienced for disaster conditions. Okay, if flying in a disaster, there's another whole podcast on why that is different than flying under normal circumstances. It's even better if your squads have worked together, and that means that they're more comfortable backing each other up and also noticing problems, handling them, alerting, you know, being more tactful and not creating a fight when you say, hey, check that. Now, if you're an incident commander or a team leader, during the operations itself, the things that you can do is set and follow, which is hard, a shift schedule. And in particular, if you think there's any chance of night flights, which you're going to want your best team, most experienced team to do, which is the team that's going to want to fly first, is to hold that squad in reserve. So you got to think ahead. You have enough people to start making real shifts work. If you're a team leader or the Air Branch Directorate, when you give the new missions or you say, I need to use a new sensor for this, that really needs to go to the most experienced pilots because it's new on top of all the other fatiguing things. They're going to be the most likely to handle any surprises. And you can certainly perform a risk analysis on paper, but maybe it'll turn out that's not worth doing that formal risk analysis, especially in the later days of the deployment, because it all comes down to, yeah, there's a risk of this or that. No, we're just so tired. That risk overwhelms everything else. Also remember the 8 hours bottle to throttle rule, okay? You know, after you've been in a disaster, you've seen so much destruction, so much human suffering, it's a long day. Sometimes it's really nice to have just a cold beer, Cold beer, sit quietly. Cold beer, sit quietly, maybe watch TV, you know, a little streaming channel, something like that. Okay, got it. But keep in mind, alcohol interferes with restorative sleep. So you probably don't want to, you know, do the whole bottle of Jack Daniels, having a tailhook type party. You know, just keep that in mind. You've got of what you're doing there. And a team leader can also remind everyone, just, you know, as the ultimate safety officer, of saying, hey, look, this is a problem. Hey, how are we going to handle this? In the daily briefings, did we see it after action? How are we going to fix this? What can we do? Now, if you're a pilot or part of a squad in the field, within a squad, one of the simplest things to do, you may not be able to get much of a rest break, but you can change up the cognitive demands, the grind by, hey, like the pilot number 2 is the visual observer on sortie 1, then you swap and have pilot number 2 being the pilot on the second sortie, and then you're just kind of going back and forth, and that helps change up the grind. And definitely each squad needs to perform quality control after each sortie, because it becomes increasingly easy to not notice that you didn't get the data, or that for some reason that SD card was corrupted or something, okay? So you gotta check. You know, there's a lot of crew resource management techniques that were built for manned aviation that we should be using more of. The FAA says, yeah, you should do this, but they don't enforce it. They don't require it. Well, we need to use verbal rehearsals. Okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. If the UAV flies off this way, then that's going to be wrong, and then I'm going to do the return to home. You know, you're going to alert me. I'm going to do the return to home. You know, that type of thing. Verbal protocols, particularly formal checklist. Did you check this? Yes. Check this? Yes. Checklist. You know, I'm not asking for, I don't think anybody can tolerate those 2 or 10-page. I've seen one checklist that was literally 10 pages long for a small UAS. I mean, the darn thing says green, you know, most times to tell you it's good to go. But there are things to check, like, did we actually check our return to home altitudes at maximum altitudes? Did we check all these things? Sterile cockpits. You know, it's easy to get slack when we're tired. Normal use, you know, but we really need to keep things quiet. And also, one of the things with a disaster, you'll often have experts and observers embedded with you from the agency you're working for. And so you got to remind them, back off, we're tired, let's not be chatty, they got to focus. Okay, and you know, the safety officer, the visual observer, really needs to be empowered to step in. I mean, and that gets back to this idea that the visual observer really isn't just an extra person. You know, keep your eyes on the bird. They really need to be a trained pilot. They really need to know what that mission is and say, wait, it's not making the turn. Is it making the turn? I'm not showing the turn here. I'm not seeing it. Those types of things. And also to remind about the sterile cockpit, to remind about, okay, did we check everything in there? So we really want to see that happen. So we've put together a one-pager best practice that's available on cresar.org. Hope that is of value to you. I'd really like to thank Professors Ranjan Almeida and Camille Perez. They're wonderful professors who've been working from the psychology and the physiology angles of this with us at CRESAR, have embedded in and slugged with us through the different disasters and are continuing to. And we thank the National Science Foundation for the funding to go back and try to catch this data and see what we can learn. Clearly more has to be done. So remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we look forward to answering your questions and helping in any way through the classes and publications that we do at cresar.org.